Hello, and welcome to Hospice Insights, the Law and Beyond, where we connect you to what matters in the ever-changing world of hospice and palliative care.
Business associates, here, there, and everywhere. When does your service provider really need a HIPAA business associate agreement? Andrew, thank you for joining me on this very important topic, because this is a question that I feel like I've been answering as long as HIPAA's been around, since like 2003. So the answer really hasn't changed, but I feel like the question still comes up all the time. And let's walk through this about when someone really needs a business associate agreement. And I think the place to start is first the definition of a business associate. And a business associate is someone that is doing something on behalf of a covered entity. And that what they're doing involves the use or disclosure of protected health information. Do I have that right, Andrew?
Yep, you have that right. Yep.
So I think the first place where people stumble is, well, okay, you are doing something for, we have a patient in common. And I think let's start with the nursing home, because this is the one that comes up most often, right? We are both providing care to this patient.
Yes.
And what I think people stumble on is, well, we're both providing care to this patient, so we need a business associate agreement and we have a contract. But I think importantly, the contract isn't someone's providing services on behalf of the other, right? And so explain that a little bit more. Walk me through why nursing homes don't typically meet the definition of a business associate, or we're not the business associate of the nursing home. Can you explain that more?
Yeah, so kind of two main reasons. First, kind of to your point, if we're talking about a hospice nursing home arrangement, I mean, the parties really are, contracting, and the terms have to do with the services being provided to the patient, as opposed to, in this case, the hospice or the facility. So the nursing home really wouldn't be doing services on behalf of the hospice so much as services directly to patients of the hospice.
Yeah, and to that point, right, the contract that we have in place is more like a care coordination contract, right? Like where the law says in 418, 113, or whatever it is, you need to have a contract so each person knows what the other person is doing. That's care coordination. That is not, you are doing something on my behalf, in contrast to like, a therapy provider who is actually doing something on our behalf, is in care coordination, and we are paying them to do stuff. We'll talk about, does that meet the definition and whatnot?
Well, yeah, and kind of to that point, the other reason why there really wouldn't be a business associate in kind of your standard nursing home hospice arrangement has to do with treatment. In fact, so the HIPAA regulations actually carve out HIPAA disclosures related to the treatment of a patient as being a business associate activity. So essentially, if you are provided, you're working with another provider, and even if you are doing things on behalf of that provider, the services you're providing are on behalf of that provider, to the extent you're disclosing PHI for the treatment of patients, that also would mean that you don't have a business associate relationship.
To recap, you're out of the mix because you're not providing a service on my behalf, right? A business associate is someone that's doing something on behalf. Entwined with that is we're sharing information for treatment purposes. So that maybe brings in the therapy provider, because all you're doing is treatment. I think where, when you come up with the example of, well, then who's left, right? Because most of these people I'm working with I'm sharing PHI with them for purposes of treatment. So then we get into, so there's a requirement in the law that talks about you need to have someone review your medications or something, right? Or sometimes people use pharmacy consultants to do that. And so that pharmacy consultant, if they're doing something that's not about treatment, right, but about a compliance related thing, so a treatment provider is doing something, right? When they're dispensing drugs, that pharmacy isn't a consultant to you, right? They're just another treatment provider. You're paying them. But if they start helping with compliance related things that are not at an individual treatment level, they could then be a business associate because they are doing something on our behalf. So they tick that box, and we don't have the exception of, well, but it's for treatment. Here it's actually about our compliance, or if we were engaging them for quality improvement and whatnot. But what are some other ones that do fall in the bucket of business associate?
We could look at what we do. So we have contracts with our clients. We provide services on providers' behalf, and in doing that, we do sometimes need access to PHI. So legal services involving the use of PHI, those would require a business associate agreement, because kind of to your point, that's more similar to that arrangement you're talking about, where the other party is a provider, but if you look closely at what's going on, that provider is providing services on behalf of the covered entity, and it's not for treatment. So that'd be similar to like legal services or accounting services, any sort of professional service, where
a clinical consultant coming in, like exactly. I do my annual outside consultant comes in, they need a business associate agreement.
Absolutely. Yep.
So one could say, why are we having this conversation? What's the harm if I sign a business associate agreement? Who cares? So, because we oftentimes, nursing homes will ask us to sign a business associate agreement. People sort of like, it's not worth the struggle. Or obviously the reason why we're doing this podcast is we're not even answering the question, are we a business associate? So the first step is, are we actually a business associate? And if the answer is no, we're not, because we're not providing services on behalf of someone, or if services are being provided, it's purely treatment. Someone could say, well, who cares? I'm a covered entity. I already have all these responsibilities. What's the harm in saying I'm a business associate? And I think it is pretty significant. And so it is worth some energy, I think, pushing back and not just signing things that come out in front of you. But why don't you explain why it is important to push back on this and not just willy-nilly sign things?
As a general matter, yeah, I don't think you want to agree, to take on contractual obligations that you're not required to take under law, or at least if you do that to kind of know what you're getting into. But essentially, if you're asked to be a business associate with a covered entity and you're not actually a business associate, you could be agreeing to, I think, things that you might not otherwise agree to. Business associates, they have breach notification duties. They have duties related to kind of accounting for permissible uses of PHI. There could be additional insurance or indemnification obligations relating to the use of PHI. Business associates generally have to make their books and their records available to the covered entity. So these are all kind of significant, I think, organizational kind of requirements. And if the underlying premise is sort of flawed and that these aren't actually required, and they kind of then become sort of just general business terms to negotiate, I think you're in a much better position than just sort of kind of flying blind and just sort of taking it for granted that, oh yeah, because I'm a provider, I need to have a business associate agreement.
So I think that whole stop and pause, evaluate, one, is someone actually providing services on someone's behalf here?
Yep.
And if the answer is no, then, stop.
Yep.
But then even if we are you bring up the important point about, well, but is that really about treatment, right? And that there's that exception for that. And that's going to take care of lots of our relationships, right? And then the relationships that we really need a BA for are the ones that, like you said, the accountants, the lawyers, the clinical consultants, if you use a pharmacy consultant, like people that are helping you on quality, compliance, those kinds of things. You need business associate agreements. And so I think people who listen to this probably have way too many business associate agreements out there. Either we've signed them or we've asked other people to sign them. So I guess if other people sign your business associate agreement, okay. But I think, our focus really is, as a hospice, are you signing business associate agreements? Like, you become a business associate when you don't need to. And that, I think your points are really well taken, is why are you going to take on contractual obligations, which oftentimes, when you look at these BAA agreements, they go beyond what the law requires and are really heavy-handed. And now it's like you may have more obligations than you have as a covered entity, right? Through this, and like you said, insurance, indemnification, being liable for stuff that, maybe you wouldn't. I mean, so I think your points are really well taken, that it's not just, I have extra paper that I maybe didn't need. This could... And I think in the day of data breaches and, people's EMR getting hacked and other stuff, I mean, this is real, that there can be breaches, and you don't want to have to, deal with being a business associate under contract in a way that you weren't. Because making these arguments after the fact, once you've already signed an agreement, that becomes difficult to say, well, but I wasn't really your business associate under the legal definition, but you signed something that said that you acknowledged you were. And so I think it can be hard to unpack that at the end of the day. But I guess any closing notes here, Andrew, because you deal with this issue quite often.
Well, I think it's just that general theme. I mean, don't assume that just because you're offered this contract that it is something that you have to sign. I know that probably strange coming from two attorneys. I mean, there's obviously a time and a place for contracts, but that doesn't mean that contracts are universally what we need to do or kind of the solution to any problem. So I think it's just kind of taking that pause, really examining the nature of the relationship. Is this really something that I need to be a for, and if so, who is the appropriate BA versus covered entity? Just kind of sorting through that at the outset, I think, will save time and hopefully can avoid some obligations that may not need to be agreed to.
Yeah, I think well taken, and we'll include in the podcast notes links to things that are on the OCR website that get at the definition of a business associate and the treatment exception, just so people have that at the ready. So if they do need to push back, it's not like they just need to say, listen to this podcast. But we'll also have this. And I think it was worth a revisit because, we're 20 years out from HIPAA, right? And I think that it hasn't been top of mind like it has when things first came out. And so I think a refresher is always nice, because it's like, okay, let's get back to the basics about who actually is a business associate. Because I remember having this conversation 20 years ago. And I think people got it then, but then, we forget what we know. And the older we get, the more we forget what we know. So I think it's a good refresher for both old and new folks in compliance. So awesome. Well, thanks for the time, Andrew. And hopefully those links that we provide will be helpful as well as this podcast.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Hospice Insights, The Law and Beyond. Thank you for joining the conversation. To subscribe to our podcast, visit our website at hushblackwell.com or sign up wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, may the wind be at your back.